Riot's matchmaking philosophy is ruining League of Legends. There are many holes that not only destroy competitive integrity, but also destroy the user experience. And over time, players are getting better and better at gaming the system and abusing these holes, which makes the issue significantly worse over time. And Riot's solutions to these issues often not only don't fix the problem, but add 10 new issues, which we'll get into. And some of these issues that I'm about to lay out affect the casual player base, and some of these issues primarily affect the hardcore player base directly. However, the issues that affect the hardcore player base also affect the casual player base indirectly. And that's because hardcore players drive the engagement to the game. It's the pro players, it's the content creators. These are the people that get the casual person who just plays a game or two of League a week. These are the people who get that person interested in playing League of Legends more, spending more money. And let's get into what Riot's matchmaking philosophy is. And this is also a philosophy that you see with every decision that Riot makes. And Riot's general philosophy is a data-driven one. They focus so hard on the data and ignore any other possible ideas behind the game. That's the only thing that they'll ever use. And let me give you one example outside of matchmaking of Riot trying to use data to completely misinterpret what's actually happening with the situation. So this is a post that Mark Yetter, who is the former lead designer of League of Legends and overheld the Riot item rework for League of Legends this season. Their stated goal was to have every champion be able to have diversity in the item choices that they had, in the mythic options that they had. And Riot said that it was a success. However, the way that they framed it to make it seem like it was a success was that they grouped champions by classes. So they would have, just looking at the marksman category, they would combine classical AD carries with Jhin and Ezreal. And so Jhin and Ezreal are two AD carries who build completely different items from other AD carries. So Jhin used to build Eclipse, which no other AD carries generally build, and Ezreal will build Divine Sunder or Triforce, champions that these champions don't generally build. So in reality, most champions actually have one, very rarely two mythic options that are viable. Riot painted the stats to make it look like their system was actually successful. And you'll see this a lot with how they talk about their client too. They'll use all of these stats about how on an Intel Pentium 2 processor, loading times in champion select are 2% lower. And it doesn't necessarily take into account the user experience, because a lot of things can't necessarily be put down to statistics, which makes things significantly muddied. And honestly, the reason that they use statistics is because statistics is something that can lie. Statistics allow you to justify your systems where there is no justification there. And let me look at one of the biggest issues that goes into matchmaking, which is queue times. Queue times are very long and unavoidable for high elo players. In high elo, when you're playing in Grandmasters, Challenger, MMR, you can very often have the time in between games be 30 minutes to potentially an hour and a half. And that would completely kill any kind of content creator or even somebody who's just a regular player, a streamer, would be pro player trying to make it. Because not only is that in 30 minutes to half an hour that you're spending out of game, that's also time that you have to be there, sticking there, and be engaged in the queue time process. You have to be there to accept the 6 queues that'll get dodged. You'll have to be there for the entire champion select. And all of these things just make it a terrible user experience that Riot doesn't necessarily have any kind of answer to. And let's go into some of the big reasons why queue times are so high. it's not necessarily just that there is a lack of players, but the biggest one is dodging. Champion select is half of the game, and Riot's current system basically makes it to where there's zero punishment from dodging. You get a small time penalty, and then you get a LP penalty. And there's two different systems for Riot. There's MMR, which is how you are actually match made with, and LP, which is this fake number that's just displayed on the front end that doesn't actually affect anything. So Riot using an LP reduction to disincentivize dodging, players have figured out over time that this is not something that actually matters, and that you can dodge, lose -3, -10 LP, and it doesn't actually matter in the long term because your MMR gain, your LP gains will even become higher in later games because your MMR is higher relative to your LP. So it all evens out in the end, and there's no reason to actually not dodge. And Riot's solution that we'll get into, when it came to tackling the Q dodge question, Riot used the idea of every single player, there's 1.6% of players dodge 3 times a day. And the problem with that is that it doesn't take into account that at this stage of the game, almost everybody in high elo has 3+ accounts. So there's never a situation in which people actually dodge more than 3 times a day, because people will dodge on one account, instantly go into the next account, which also gets rid of the time penalty, and then they'll go swap back and forth between account to account to account. So Riot's solution to the dodging issue was adding a new third tier to dodging, which is a 12-hour lockout from queuing and then a -10 LP punishment. The problem is this doesn't actually fix anything, because nobody ever needed to dodge more than 2 times a day, because you could just swap from one account to another, and this has no downsides. Even now, you can still dodge on this third account and then just not play on that account anymore. So I could just play on my second or third account for the rest of the day. So this 12-hour lockout doesn't actually change anything. And it goes into this data-driven approach that lacks context. There is no context behind these numbers that they're actually pointing out. And one thing that you generally see with Riot, which we'll talk about other examples of them doing this, is that they don't actually play the game. They have no idea what actually goes on with these queue times. This second queue lockout time does not exist if you actually play one game between dodges. So this is something that has never been acknowledged by Riot. So basically how it works is that if you dodge once, you'll get the 6-minute Q dodge penalty, and you'll get the -3. But then if you play a full game that doesn't get surrendered, the next Q dodge lockout will be another 6 minutes. So you never actually get that 30-minute lockout ever. So that's something that's never actually been acknowledged by Riot, and it just makes it feel like they don't actually play the game, because there's no tweet, there's no Reddit post, there's no dev blog which actually acknowledges that this has been an issue in the dodging system that they have forever. And so who knows, maybe this 100 or this 12-hour lockout will never actually happen because their system is still bugged and they just don't know anything about it. And that goes into another thing, is that high elo queue times are very, very high, which just make it terrible for content creators because they're in the game way less than they are out of game. They're spending more than half of their time out of game doing something else, and that just kills content. It's no secret that low elo smurfing has always been the most successful content in League, not just because it's stomping games, but because you're always in-game more often. And actually being in-game and seeing the thing that you want to come for to a stream, which is League gameplay, you're actually being able to get that. And Another example of a system that Riot has has never actually played in or experienced is this concept called smurf queue, which was a attempt from Riot to stop smurfs from being in the same queues as regular players, because there was constant complaints from places like Reddit where basically just a bunch of people thought that they were hard stuck because they were always going up against smurfs, when in reality they probably weren't going up against smurfs a lot of the time. So Riot's system, the way that they developed it to try to weed out smurfs from non-smurfs, was taking players who had a large difference between their MMR and their LP. So if their LP was low but their MMR was high, then it would put them into this smurf queue. And the problem with that is decay. So half the people in smurf queue weren't actual smurfs on a new account, but it was decayed, lapsed players who had quit the game for a while and were just getting back into it. And smurf queue is by far the worst experience that I have ever had in League. Not only is it full of a bunch of just generally not well-to-do people, the problem is that the games are so uneven because half of the people aren't actually smurfs and half of them are. So there's another issue there, is that the experience of a lapsed player coming back into the game is just absolutely terrible. Because if you're a Plat 1 player whose account decayed to gold, and then all of a sudden you come back into the game, and then you're just getting completely destroyed game after game after game by these players who are infinitely better than you could ever be, that's going to be a system that doesn't incentivize lapsed players to come back into the game. And that's something that Riot's never seen. Riot just sees that smurfs are less often in the average player's game, therefore the system works. Because it solved this one problem, they overlooked every other problem with smurf queue. And the big problem that it comes to with high elo players and content creators is that not only do you have high queue times and high elo, but you have high queue times and low elo. So there's no way for content creators to actually get past this, because smurf queue times are just as high as high elo queue times, because there's so few people that are actually eligible to be in that queue at one time that you'll very often spend 30 plus minutes in queue trying to get into a game. And the game quality is just going to be so terrible because of how disparate it is, how much of a difference there is in player skill. Not only are there just diamond smurfs, they're lapsed plat players, and there are challenger smurfs all in the same queue. And it's really just kind of a crapshoot depending on which team gets more actual high-level players on a team. That the queue is just completely over pretty much by champion select. The game doesn't even have to go into champion select for the game to be decided. So that makes the game so much worse for content creators, which makes it to where you kill the casual audience as well. Because sure, the casual audience has less smurfs in their games, but now content creators just don't want to play the game anymore. So many people are leaving League. So many people are just feeling so discontent with the game state right now. Because one other example of how Riot's philosophy is just so weird when it comes to this is the idea of competitive integrity at the top of the ladder, at the highest echelons of solo queue. There are many things that they've done in other games that Riot has done that they don't do in League, and the one thing that they got rid of was the one thing that people wanted. So first off, the one thing that was destroying competitive integrity in high elo was duo queuing. However, that was also the one thing that was destroying competitive integrity that people enjoyed the most. Whereas the number, like, so much of the ladder, especially in later portions of the season, that destroys the ladder is win trading. People will queue up with their buddies on an alternate account and intentionally ruin the game to get one account to be significantly higher than it actually should be. And this win trading is a very, very large portion of the ladder, and it's never something that has actually been punished, ever. No matter how much proof somebody will have about win trading, it'll never get banned. There is another streamer slash content creator called Forest Within who will have an entire document filled of 200 plus games that lists out every single instance of likely win trading and just having pretty much undeniable proof that one person was win trading, and then it still doesn't get banned. However, win trading gets banned in Wild Rift. In high elo Wild Rift, win traders got banned permanently and had their rewards like revoked. So all of that, that's something that Riot has done for other games, but then not done for League. And the only thing that I can really honestly say is that I'm not even sure that Riot wants League of Legends to really still exist, especially in NA. Because NA is also a very heavy FPS market, so Riot doesn't really feel the need to keep League alive in NA. And it seems like they're kind of on maintenance mode, because a lot of these issues that I'm talking about are especially more potent on NA compared to other regions, just because of the kind of culture that's attached to it, where people are more willing to get wins that they don't necessarily deserve, and et cetera, et cetera. So just Riot does not play their own game. They don't care about the user experience. And another example of something that it seems I don't understand why Riot doesn't have this in League. I really just don't, is voice chat. Voice chat exists in every single other competitive game that exists. There is a new Pokemon Pokemon MOBA game, and this Pokemon MOBA game has voice chat in it. Valorant has voice chat in it. Other Riot games have voice chat in it, and it works perfectly fine. And then Riot still to this day refuses to add it to solo queue. And I feel like that's something that could revitalize solo queue incredibly, because a lot of League players are actually switching over to Dota right now. And one of the biggest things that they say of something that makes Dota so much more enjoyable to have is the fact that there's voice chat. Because one of the biggest things that is an issue in solo queue is miscommunication. That's where almost all toxicity really comes from, is when one person thinks one thing is going to happen and the other person thinks another thing is going to happen. And it's almost impossible to really kind of hash out these differences in text chat, but it's really easy in voice chat. So I feel like that's something that they could actually do to increase the enjoyment out of the game. And one thing about dodging that's often talked about as a big issue in matchmaking and in the NA server is one tricks. And I'm a one trick myself, so this is coming from my perspective. And I understand how much of an issue that one tricks are in solo queue. Because oftentimes, one tricks are just going to be, I might be challenger on my main champion and my main role, but when I'm playing something else, I might just be like a Diamond 1 player, because it's not something that I necessarily have much experience on right now. And a big problem is that dodging makes the one trick problem significantly worse. Because what happens is a lobby will go right to the end and get dodged at the last second. And in the next lobby, all of the champions from the enemy team will be banned on one side. So it's more common that more often than not, a champion select will be dodged. And that means that the next game will have all of the one tricks on one side being dodged. And then it's just a question of when these games get through. There'll eventually be a point to where all of the one tricks and all of the other players who wanted to dodge are out of the queue, and then it's just people wanting to get in the game, and they'll accept these low quality games where the more and more Q dodges happen, the more and more likely that the game is going to be significantly lower quality. Not only are Q times going up, which broadens the MMR range that a game is allowed to be in, but then you're also getting into games where every single one trick is banned. Whereas if dodging was much more heavily punished, then one tricks wouldn't be as much of an issue because they'd be able to more reliably get their champions and less reliably be a deficit to their team. And this also goes into another thing of their matchmaking philosophy is role select. This is something that might be pretty unpopular with a lot of people, but I think role select is not good for the game. And what I mean by role select is people being able to choose which roles they play, whereas before it would be fill. And when it came to how the game worked with fill, is that people more or less had to be able to play one champion in each role and have much more variety in their own play. And that also makes people better at their own individual role, because now this person might have to have played a couple more jungle games, and so they understand that a jungle might have to come at this specific time, or the jungler might understand that this laner can't rotate because their wave state is in a very bad spot. And so you develop more empathy without role select. And if you want to go the other way and you want to have role select be a better thing, one thing that exists in Wild Rift that has no reason not to exist in League of Legends is role preference. So the way that role preference queue works in ranked in Wild Rift is that you choose your roles 1 through 5 in Wild Rift. So you can choose, like I would choose mid, top, AD carry, support, jungle. Because I'm not necessarily somebody who's super great at jungle. I don't feel like I'd be super confident in it. So if it's my last preferred role, then I'll get it very, very infrequently. Whereas I'm okay with playing the other roles. And this is something that would just be so much better at getting more accurate matchmaking. Because some people can play more than 2 roles, but if they don't get their 2 roles, they'll just get a random of the 3 roles. And let's say one of these roles is something that they just can't play at all. They'll have like a 20% win rate on. If there's a role preference of 1 through 5, then they'll be more likely to get one of their 3rd or 4th roles. And that'll be something that'll just be so much better. And it does work in Wild Rift. It clearly operates well, but it's not something that's added to League. And a big reason why I feel like all of these things are added to Valorant and Wild Rift that aren't added to League of Legends is because Valorant and Wild Rift are games that are entering new markets. So Valorant, just straight up, it's an attempt from Riot to get players from CSGO. And so CSGO players aren't going to be willing to accept the kind of just like crap and unwillingness of Riot to do things. CSGO players would never accept Valorant not having voice chat. So they have to add it because they're not catering to League of Legends players who are already secured in the Riot ecosystem. Valorant is trying to appeal to CSGO players and steal that market. Wild Rift is trying to appeal to Vainglory players and players who want some more serious mobile experiences. And especially in third world markets, PUBG Mobile is really popular. There's a COD Mobile that's really popular. So they need to have these systems be as good as possible for their new shiny toys that League was already kind of first to market. So they don't feel like they need to actually do these things to improve League of Legends. And the problem with that is that, sure, that may give you the ability to have a certain amount of players staying in the game, but it can only work for so long. Eventually, players will be dripping out and out over time, which is something that's happening now. if you look at League of Legends numbers on not only LCS, but you look at general Twitch numbers and you look at YouTube numbers for League of Legends content, they're all significantly down. And these issues are getting worse and worse over time, and Riot just doesn't feel like they're doing anything about it. And this issue with the Q dodge time is just one example of Riot's failure to actually properly tackle issues. Is that if anybody in Riot on this team that worked on this new Q dodge time actually played the game, they would understand that this isn't an actual solution. So many people have given hundreds of different ideas that would actually fix Q times, and they refuse to do any of them. And like, none of these things that they do actually works. And how long has Riot's matchmaking system existed? They've been working on this for 10 plus years, and it's still in the current state that it is. There's no reason to give faith to Riot at this point to expect them to be able to get it done better in the future. Riot has done nothing to earn and deserve that faith. And it all ultimately comes down to their data-driven approach, which is really, honestly, data-driven approach is really just an anagram or a simile or some kind of literary term for a liar-driven approach. Because data is something that's really easy for people to just lie about. And that's what Riot does with their clients, what they did with Mythic Diversity, and what they do with matchmaking now, is that they're using data to justify their systems, either intentionally or unintentionally. It's making these systems look like they're actually working much better than they are. But the data lacks context. This is something that I know for a fact to also be a thing, not only just in Riot, but in esports organizations in general. There will be 2 people for an analyst position at a specific LCS team. Let's just say CLG. Not saying CLG particularly, but just a hypothetical example. There'll be 2 players. One of them will be a high elo player who knows the ins and outs of the game, can hit Masters Plus on every single role. They've hit Challenger before on their main role. They know lane swaps. They study VODs of every region. They know the ins and outs. They know the things that are top of the meta. And that's where their specialty lies. And there'll be another person who has a statistics degree in college and has been hard stuck silver for 8 years. But they have really, really nice fancy graphs and fancy statistical analyses of the game, like Power of Evil, CLG, you want to beat TSM. Well, I have figured out that Power of Evil takes blue buff on average at 10 minutes and 36 seconds into the game. And now, for the hiring manager who doesn't know anything about League of Legends, the hiring manager has no idea how to tell if the challenger player actually knows what they're talking about. But that person sees these fancy graphs and fancy information spreadsheets that the person with the statistics degree pulls up, and they're going to be the one that gets the job over the person with the actual game knowledge. And this is something that's it's prevalent in Riot, it's prevalent in organizations. Honestly, it's just a thing of society in general, and really, I just don't see any solution for it. So it's really just one of those kind of unfortunate things, but the important thing for you, the audience, is to try to understand these things and be able to understand when somebody's lying to you, when somebody doesn't necessarily know what they're talking about, when somebody is trying to use data to justify something that isn't necessarily there. And it's really important for you to understand what's actually going on in the ground on the base level of what's actually happening with the user experience, and that's what matters. So if you're having a bad time in solo queue, Riot saying that you're not actually having a bad time in solo queue isn't relevant. It still exists. And this is just generally an issue that Riot has, an issue that's there really everywhere. And pull up 1 second. Gonna get some hydration. So yeah, this data-driven approach to League of Legends is not doing any favors to the game. It's just making it worse. It's just driving players away from the game. And ultimately, I don't think Riot cares. I think Riot is perfectly fine with having League of Legends die in the West. China is like 90+% of their revenue, and NA is like a pittance. I've talked to people who lead teams in Riot, and even they've said that if League of Legends died in North America, nothing would change for Riot. They wouldn't care. Because ultimately, it's just such a small fraction of their revenue that maybe the LCS team cares because there are so many big investors in that aspect. But for the actual player base of the game, I don't think that they actually care. And you also see this in general, is that I feel like the teams, the organizations in the LCS kind of understand this, which is how you see a lot of the teams trying to get rid of the import rule. Because these teams see the writing on the walls of League of Legends becoming less popular in the West, and they want to see exponential growth. So what these LCS teams want to do is make NA be the global god league of every single player can come here, no holds barred. There's no reason to have any NA talent in the game. You can get a team with Chovy, Nuguri, Canyon, Viper, and Keria. And that could be an NA team. And you could have 10 NA teams that are like that. And that it just doesn't feel like Riot is trying to make League actually work in NA. And this matchmaking philosophy that they use is just one example of the issue that they're actually going on about. And there's a lot more topics that I could talk about. We'll leave them for other videos. Thank you guys all for watching. Guys, in the next video, have a wonderful day. Goodbye and good night. Yeet.